Paul, welcome to this very late night diecast.
Yeah, the listeners won't be able to hear it, but this is 2 hours later than we normally record.
Right. Well, they'll probably be asleep now, so they're not even listening to the show.
That's true. I don't know why we do these so late at night. Nobody shows up.
Right. Yeah.
And our live studio audience is no help at all.
Two people who do not understand how pre-recorded shows work, having a conversation about the pre-recorded show that they host.
I could have a live studio audience. If I asked my kids to come in here, I'm sure they would be willing to offer commentary.
Did you ever see the pre-recorded call-in show skit on Mr. Show?
No, I didn't. But that does sound like a good gag.
I will link it in the show notes if I can find it. You can only find it bootleg on YouTube. So, of course, copyright strike, it comes and goes. But if I can find it, I will put it in the show notes. It's one of my favorite skits ever. I never even watched Mr. Show. It was just I wasn't watching TV during that period of history. This was like late 90s. This is the only skit I've seen from the television show. And it made me laugh until I had to take my inhaler due to asthma attack.
Oh, no.
That is high praise indeed. If your joke can nearly kill me, then it's a good joke.
It's like Mary Poppins all over again.
Right. So this week last week I posted that rant on Satisfactory where I dropped all those F-bombs.
Yeah, we talked about it a little bit on the last show, and then you just couldn't let it go. You had to make a whole article out of it.
And I spent like a whole day and a half last week just playing Satisfactory and being angry the whole time. And I'm like, what? No. This game's making me miserable. Why am I still playing it? Why am I still trying to get fun out of it? This is stupid. Why am I bothering? And so I wrote that, and that was very cathartic to write that article. I should have, normally when I do stuff like that, it simmers for a week, right? And that's why you saw all those F-bombs. I was coming in hot. Like, that was written the night before. Like, that's what I did instead of playing the game that night, is I wrote that article. And then instead of letting it stew for a week and, smooth it out, file off all the sharp edges, I just posted it red hot to the blog.
So all that stuff about don't post mad and stuff, it doesn't apply to you.
Right. I mean, I naturally have, all this self-awareness and self-control that prevents me from making mistakes. But most mortals shouldn't. Yeah, it was very cathartic to write. And then as soon as I was done, I was like, I'm sick of Factorio, but it's updated since the last time I played it.
Ooh.
It has reached its final form. They are done with it.
So there are finally the orbital platforms that they promised back in version 0.3?
I don't think so. I guess that was an abandoned feature. I gotta say, Factorio is one of the Friday facts. They used to do a post every week talking about the optimizations. Deeply rewarding for me to read. They put in so much work to optimize this game. And it's beautiful, and it makes me happy. I wish I could see the code. It sounds like beautiful code. Talk about, load balance. You've got this factory with, 5,000 conveyor belts in it, 10 miles of conveyor belts and 5,000 grabber arms. And it just runs absolutely silky smooth. And they talk about load balancing all of that across multiple threads and across a multiplayer game and keeping everything in sync. It's an amazing achievement, and I really love it.
They're playing Factorio behind the scenes, programming Factorio.
Right. So I love it, and there was some new stuff for me. a few new end game things I hadn't seen before, and a bit of new art. They did a huge art overhaul before they finished off the game, like in the last year of development. They made much higher resolution assets, and they looked fantastic, and I got to see the final versions of everything. And so I'm playing Factorio again, and it is amazing.
I have a copy of Factorio, and I have played it before, but I've never gone anywhere close to beating it. It's always been like, well, the one time I played it, it was like, all right, I got a miner, and I've got a thing that makes stuff, and I've got a grabber arm that moves stuff to another thing that makes stuff. I got it. I know this game. I don't have to play it anymore.
Right. It is satisfying to see that rocket launch for the first time. That feels good. I haven't launched the rocket since coming back to the game. I've been kind of noodling around, just building trains and things like that.
You're not speedrunning it. This isn't like a 1 hour and 28-minute run to the rocket or whatever.
Is that I was just thinking the other day, I wonder what the current world record is.
I don't know if that's exactly, but it was on the order of like an hour and a half or something.
I remember seeing a 2-hour run of it. You know, one of the earliest runs way back, you know, like 4 or 5 years ago now. I remember seeing somebody do it in 2. And even that was an amazing thing to see. But wow, an hour and a half. Let me look it up. All right, so it looks like 3 months ago somebody hit an hour 40, an hour 38 minutes. So yeah, that's amazing. Yeah, I'm definitely I never speed run it. I enjoy building the base and, you know, making everything all neat and tidy and nice walkways everywhere.
Yeah, yeah. It was interesting reading your Satisfactory article, which highlights kind of some differences, which we've mentioned before in the show about how you really like everything being orderly, and I just care about it like actually working, and to hell with looking nice, which probably is the reason why I've never been employed as a programmer, or actually not often employed as a programmer. How about that?
Right. And I think that's something that's sort of, I mean, you develop over time. You begin a project and you're like, this won't matter, I'll throw it together. And then 6 months later, you're like, oh wow, this project grew into a thing and now I'm maintaining it. I really wished I'd put more thought into how, you know, I designed it back in the day when I thought it was going to be something I used for a week. And you get burned like that enough times in your career and you just become incredibly conservative and you want to plan everything out and you start thinking about maintainability. And then you want everything. The pain of looking at old, ugly code, that's a burn. And once you get burned by that several times in your career, you will become shy of doing that again. To yourself.
Yeah, yeah.
So, you beat Satisfactory?
Yeah, you can't really beat the game, but to the degree that
consume its content.
Yeah, complete it. The final the tier 8 or whatever, after tier 8, you can fill up the space elevator one more time, and it says this is the final content for early access. You know, like this is it. This, you know, final, you know, after this is just going to be when we release the game or whatever. So I assume that there's like nothing else until they do the story part of the game. And so I did that, and I got the secret reward, which was, as one might have predicted, cool but also useless. And
right.
And now I guess I'm kind of done. I've got my nuclear reactors running sustainably, so I've eliminated my nuclear waste. I've got my all my factories producing stuff. I'm, you know, cranking out tickets, not as fast as I would hope, but you know, like I don't need them for anything. I've already unlocked everything, and yeah, it's just kind of, I guess I'm kind of done.
Congratulations, I guess.
I kind of wish that it was one of those games that had like procedural content so that I could keep playing it and discovering new things.
Me too. Me too. But I mean, I guess I'm mad at the game and not playing it anymore. But yeah, it would be like, once you beat it, it's like, well, I could play the game again, but have a different starting location and beat it again. But like, 90% of that game will be the same. You know, yes, different starting location, but once you get going, it's, you know, you're probably going to end up at a lot of the same nodes and building all the same crap.
Yeah. I think if I was going to start over from the beginning, I would plan the whole thing out. Like I would plan out what I needed, like how many buildings and how many types of whatever, and like get a scheme for how I was going to put it together so that I wouldn't ever have to tear anything down. And that would be the ideal, right? Is to never have to take anything apart, to just build stuff and like that's where it's going to be.
But because it's not procedural, you could, I mean, that's kind of like, you can just solve that once and then the game is solved forever. It's like, there
Yeah,
is the one way to play it, yeah. At least they should, like, have a mode where it scrambles all the resource nodes. That'd be something that you could probably do.
yeah, yeah. Well, and there is the aspect of the alternate recipes, which some of them are pretty essential in my mind. So if you, the order that you get those in kind of determines some of how you play.
That's true. So, speaking of engineering,
Okay.
and making things work well, my car isn't. My
Oh
car has,
no.
back in 2016, we bought a new car for Heather. And I was happy it was the newest car I'd ever owned. I've always owned like 10-year-old cars. That's
Right,
just, you know,
right.
the
We
cheapest
talked about it
place
on the
to...
show.
Yeah, yeah. But this car's only 1 year old. And here we are 4 years later. And it's going to the junkyard.
Oh
So,
no.
yeah. It's, so this car did not make it to 10 years old. This car is going to die at, it's a 2015, so yeah, it's going to die at 6 or 7. You know, it's a 2015, which means maybe it came out in 2014. I don't, you know, because they always name them 1 year ahead. I don't know.
Yeah,
Whatever.
yeah.
6 or 7 years old. Very young to die as a car. It was a Nissan, and we paid $5,000 for it back in 2016. And I was like, $5,000 for a year-old car? That's really nice. Not a lot of mileage. That was pretty good. But now, here we are, 2011 or 2021, and the transmission broke. This is why the car is so cheap. The transmissions are notorious for failing, and they are crazy expensive. It's basically, to get it repaired, another $5,000. You just buy the car again.
Ugh,
The
wow.
transmission costs as much as the entire car. And, you know, there's nothing saying that it won't break again in a year. And then want another $5,000. And so we're like, no, that's a terrible gamble. I hate gambling. So to explain what this is like. This is like when you have a car and it stops working and you can't use it anymore. That's what this is
Are
like.
you making a terrible car analogy about your terrible car?
Yes. It just breaks my heart because you can drive it. This is a car that you can drive around. We drove it to the automotive place. We're going to drive it home. Then we're going to drive it to the junkyard and leave it there. And that just is a heartbreaking waste. Like, this is 90% of a great car that could continue to work for decades. But no, the transmission is so expensive, it is not worth maintaining. Or it's too expensive to maintain.
That's so
So
weird.
just,
Is it like some sort of weird interface that no one can replicate, or is there some sort of DRM in there that's taking it down? Did the servers go down?
yeah, I don't know why it has to cost so. I mean, it's, okay, it's like a replacement transmission, not a brand new one. My goodness, brand new one would be more still. But like a refurbished one or whatever is like 3,400. And then you add in parts and labor and and then there's some other incidental stuff. And you
Sure.
know, that needs to be fixed.
Yeah, you double the cost of the parts to install it, basically, right?
Right. No, no, I don't, yeah, I don't know. I don't know. But yeah, the total bill was just short of 5,000, and we're like, we can't. Not only do we not have that,
That makes no sense.
right, we don't even have that. So that's another thing. You can take out a car loan. We bought this previous car in cash. We don't have it now. And I thought about a weird problem this is. If I want to get another car, I can go to a dealership and get a loan, right? But you can't get a loan to fix your current car. Which means if you can't afford to fix your car, the system can help you throw it away and get another one.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I mean, I suppose the idea is that they know what condition a new car is in, right? Like, it's new, so... But if it's old and you need to get it fixed, like, they don't know. You've, been shooting holes in it with a shotgun or something. Like, they don't know. So,
right.
Yeah.
Right.
I'm not saying going to offer you a loan on the value of something they don't know what the value is.
Right, right. It's just weird. And it does bother me how many cars wind up in the junkyard. I was just watching a Veritasium video the other day about a real conspiracy that actually happened, where the light bulb companies got together and all agreed that they would deliberately engineer their light bulbs to not live as long. And they had ways to make them live for thousands of hours, but they deliberately all agreed they're going to cap it 1,000 hours. So for the last 70 years, we've been buying light bulbs and throwing them away when they could have been building, incredible, long-lasting light bulbs. And that bothers me as an engineer. That just makes me crazy. And it bothers me more in the case of cars. I mean, nobody's uncovered a conspiracy, but, I think everybody sort of suspects there is a bit to the design of a car to make sure they don't last too long. And because they are so expensive and so much energy and so many resources go into them, it offends me on a deep level. And it's like, I wouldn't mind paying more for a machine that was just designed to last as long as possible. But no, everything is just sort of designed to last just long enough. I mean, the perfect car is one that will last until the warranty is over and then immediately dissolve into a pile of dust. And you have to buy a new one.
There's an engineering poem. I don't know if it was written by an engineer. In fact, I forget who it's written by, but it's called the Tale of the One Hoss Shay. And it's like this, one horse wagon, basically, that every part was designed exactly as strong as every other part, which is great because like nothing ever wears out until one day the whole thing just like comes to bits and like dissolves into, like you said, just like dissolves into wood shavings, right? And the whole thing's just like poof. It's gone. And
like Sickly
that's the ideal. Exactly. One of the crazy things, though, about engineering something is that there's a property of steel called and it's a property of almost all metals called the fatigue limit. And steel has this interesting quality where you can design it so that there's an infinite fatigue limit where if you get the stresses low enough, it'll never break, even if you keep stressing it over and over again. So if you've got a part and you've got like a paper clip or something, you can bend it back and forth, and eventually it'll break, because even though the individual stresses aren't large enough to break it, the fatigue wears on it and eventually it hardens and cracks and breaks. So if you design your machine on a car, there's all these vibrations, and so the vibrations will break it eventually, even if the individual stresses won't, unless you design it below the fatigue limit. And so they do that for like drive shafts are almost always designed to be, with the stresses below the fatigue limit, so that they'll just never break, because otherwise the repeated stresses on the shaft as it spins around and around and around will break it rather quickly, because it's spinning, some thousands of RPM, and so they have to design
that
those
would be
parts.
Catastrophic. Can you imagine snapping a drive shaft at speed on the highway?
Yeah, exactly.
Oh, That would be spectacular.
Yeah, and well, and all the all the parts inside the engine, all the camshafts and all the drive rods and all that stuff. So all those parts are designed so that they'll basically never fail.
Right. I've never heard of any of that stuff failing.
Yeah, well, my dad actually had one. It launched the cam right out the top of the hood of the car when he's on the highway. But
Wow.
they don't want that to happen. That's a problem.
Right. So they take all the stuff that won't kill you if it fails, and they make that stuff just strong enough. Only as it's strong as it needs to be.
Yeah. The classic example is water heaters, because water heaters are, they're exposed to all this water all the time, and they're hot, and so they corrode really quickly. And so they coat them with glass, and that keeps the corrosion down. And then they also have anodes in it. They're sacrificial anodes. And so they could make water heaters out of stainless steel. Stainless steel isn't that much more expensive than normal steel. It's maybe twice as expensive or 3 times as expensive. It's not prohibitively expensive. And the cost of the water heater isn't really in the steel. It's in the engineering and the welding and the fabrication and the assembly and the transportation and all that stuff.
Transportation,
yeah. Installation, yeah. And so, like, they could make them out of stainless steel and they last forever, basically. But they don't. They put the sacrificial anode in, and the sacrificial anode, you can calculate exactly how long that thing's going to last. And then you can calculate exactly how long it's going to take to corrode through the rest of the water heater. So when you get a water heater that's rated for 6 years, you better bet your good odds that it's going to fail in about 6.5 years, because they got that dialed in.
So stupid.
Now, in the case of water heaters, to their defense, they do tend to build up hard water, like calcium and stuff will build up in them, because you heat the water up and then the calcium falls out, and then it slowly crud builds up in there. And so you don't actually want a stainless steel water heater that's going to last for 100 years, because it's going to get all flooded with crud, and then you're going to have to clean it out, and that's going to be a huge hassle, and it's probably going to outweigh the cost of just buying a new one. But it does seem, it does seem kind of scummy. Yeah, the capacity would go down and down.
It's just all calcium at the bottom.
Yeah. Well, if you cut open an old water heater, you just find a couple inches of calcium in there.
A couple of inches? Wow. I have we have a mini water heater that sits on the countertop. So that, you have piping hot, like water hot enough for tea, and it's, all insulated. And that's much more efficient than putting on a pot to boil, reboiling the same water 15 times every time you want another cup. Is just have a machine that automatically cooks it and then keeps it very hot all day. And that thing, we bought the exact same, it failed, and we were like, all right, we owned this for about 6 years. And sure enough, when it failed, the bottom was getting kind of rusty, and I don't know about drinking water that's been sitting in rust. That doesn't sound like a good idea. And yeah, it was all gross inside with and it was really weird to see the two of them side by side, because on the outside they look almost identical, but then you look inside and you're like, oh, so gross. The inside's just horrible residue that will never ever come off.
Right. It's like a geological formation in there, almost literally, because that's how they're formed, right?
Right. It's even like, if you want to get rid of that stuff, you put some vinegar in there, and we, cook vinegar all day in it, and it just barely just barely got rid of it, because it's took 6 years to build up. Right. Oh. And then you look at the new one, and it's just this perfect shiny surface, and like, I can't taste the difference, but it feels like I should be able to. Yeah, it does seem that way, doesn't it? Of course, with cars, there's no reason they couldn't make the car body out of stainless steel. Like, isn't the Tesla truck stainless? I don't know about I know the Time Machine was. The DeLoreans are stainless. Of course, that's heavy as hell. And they kind of... It's not heavier than normal carbon steel. They're almost identically in density. Really? I always heard that DeLoreans were incredibly heavy because they have stainless steel bodies. Now, I heard that as a kid back when DeLoreans were still on the road and not, you know, museum pieces. So, and back then, we were building, you know, we hadn't yet separated the market between cars and tanks. So, there was a lot of confusion back then.
I'm sure
People,
there are engineering problems if you're trying to do like high quality design with stainless versus carbon steel, and maybe there's some treatment process that you can't do, but to my knowledge, a normal carbon steel is weaker than stainless, you know, without heat treating anyway.
but what the consumer really wants is a car that is, in terms of weight, you know, like a tank. Like those 70s cars. Have you ever been in one of those 70s cars?
Well, no. I mean, I drive a 15 passenger club wagon, so like heaviness is on the table.
Okay. There is something about modern heavy cars that is very different compared to the 70s cars. The pre-gas crunch cars were crazy things. So heavy, and you could feel that weight. You could feel it even as a passenger, just the car rocking. It just had like a ship-like quality to it, where you go around a bend and it's just sort of, you could just feel all of that heavy metal changing direction and struggling to deal with all the inertia, trying to make the metal go in the direction you were previously headed. It was just amazing, and they were so big inside. Just so, I mean, okay, I was 3 feet tall, so, but they really were big inside. They really were
Right.
much bigger than modern cars inside. And so heavy. And I was driving one. My parents had a Mercury, which is just and this would have been in 92, just a giant land yacht, you know, from the heyday of gigantic American car. You know, this is a Cadillac-sized car, a classic Cadillac-sized car. Just this enormous thing. And it was impossible to park, and, you know, it was so hard to get it into a space, and once you did, it would stick out anyway. Because it was long, too.
Right. Like 18 feet long, 8 feet wide.
There was a normal, or they were doing road work on the highway that we used every day. Every trip out of the house had to use this highway. Our house was basically attached to this highway. You leave our little drive, you're on the highway. So we had to go use this everywhere, and it squashed everything down to one lane, and it was the minimum size lane. Whatever that is, 12 feet or whatever. So you have as much room as you always do in a lane, but now there's concrete barriers on either side. And oh
yeah.
boy, that was terrifying in the Mercury. It felt like you had an inch on either side. It felt like you were just threading the needle in this thing as you rolled through that. Just that concrete. It was like the trench run. It was like the trench run in Star Wars if X-Wings were the size of the trench. It's just like...
It's like flying the Millennium Falcon in there.
Right. It's like, stay on target. It is literally impossible for me to not be on target without hitting the walls. So I hated the Mercury. I did ding it a few times. And we had a similarly huge station wagon, and I dinged it too. And I just like, no, I want tiny cars. I want things that are easy to park. I want teeny, tiny cars. I want to get out of it, and I want it to have lots of room in the parking space so I can open my door and fit groceries. Like, I just need the driver's seat. What do I need all the rest of that space for? And then I got married, and I realized why you need all that rest of the space.
Yeah. It would be real nice. Well, I mean, there's always motorcycles.
Right. And that always sounded really good to me, but then people used to call them donor cycles, and I thought, maybe not.
Still do.
Still do. Thought, maybe I want some of my vehicle around me.
Yeah. I've got this dream of like designing a suit of armor for motorcycles, but then it's like, wait, that would just be a car, I guess, with 2 wheels.
Iron Man riding a motorcycle.
Yeah, you know, the dream.
Right. But that makes sense, because, yeah, accidents when you don't have a car around you are pretty dicey.
Yeah, you don't want to hit something. I remember the first time I rode a motorcycle, and you feel naked. Like, you feel like you don't have anything on. Like, it's like, oh no, I'm exposed on every side. Everyone's judging me.
Right. I should have worn clothes for this.
Yeah. Well, and you're wearing, like, you know, I was wearing full gear, you know, helmet and jacket and pants and full boots, and like, you know, you walk around in that thing and you're like, oh, I'm like the Michelin Man, but then you get on a motorcycle and like, oh no, I needed more. I underestimated.
Right. You're like, boy, I'm wearing a lot of stuff for August. This doesn't feel very good. Then you get on a motorcycle and you feel like you're naked. Like, I'm not sure how much benefit this denim is going to give me if I fall off this bike at this speed.
Right. Well, and like, even I had gear, like full, you know, leather gear, you know, but even then it's like, man, if I hit something, like, that leather's not going to protect my bones. I'm going to break into a bunch of pieces.
You have 12 broken bones, but no lacerations. So you got that going for you.
Yeah. Oh. So I always kind of thought, like, man, if only motorcycles were like larger and heavier and covered in metal plates. Like, oh, I just invented the compact car again.
Right. Well, you know, in the Robotech, the Macross series, they had an excellent idea where you ride around on a motorcycle, but when you're done with it, you hit a button and it sort of envelops you and it turns into like this robot suit that you wear. Like, it folds up around you. So it becomes like an Iron Man suit that you can fly around in. But then if you don't want to be Iron Man, you can just like have it unfold and then you can ride it. So why don't they do that?
Or you can park it and then, like, you know, lean against it while you smoke your cigarette.
Oh, yeah. And then all the girls will think you're cool because you smoke.
And you've got a robot space bike. But mostly because you smoke.
Mostly because everybody knows smoking is cool and that will never change.
Never goes out of style.
Hey, baby. Hey, baby. What are you up to?
Oh, dear. The sad thing is that, like, the gravelly voice that you get from smoking is still actually attractive to women.
Interesting. I did not know this.
Yeah, I think it has to do with, like, low voice is an indicator of testosterone,
right,
which is, like, good for women for whatever reason. And
sure,
so, like,
it makes you more masculine.
Yeah.
Makes you, it's one of the indicators of masculinity. And anytime you twiddle with any of those, make somebody a little taller, a little hairier, lower voice, or you dial it the other way, you get more feminine. And you play around with that, and some people are like, that does nothing for me, and they're like, and other people are like, oh, boy, that's what I like. People are funny.
That's a weird thing, yeah.
We even have a question here in the mailbag about sideburns and beards. Maybe we'll get to it today.
Oh boy. Well, let's do it. Let's do some mailbags.
All right. Actually, I wanted to talk about you brought this up before the show. You post this show to YouTube every week. And as part of that, you post the show notes into the YouTube description, or you try. YouTube fights you.
Yeah. So when you put a show on, you can add little notes for, like, you know, the timestamp and then a description of a thing, and it'll put those in the show, you know, at the bottom.
That's
on the
great
feature.
I absolutely love the timestamp feature. Just so good. I love every time I pull up a video and I see all the breaks. I'm like, yes.
And for anyone who wants to do that to their own videos, the feature is called chapters. And the trick to it is that your first timestamp has to start with 00:00. And then it works. I don't know why they did it that way, but that's what they did. So anyway, so I put the show on YouTube, but often we get quite extensive, long mailbag questions. And YouTube, for whatever reason, has a 5,000 character limit on your description length for a video, no matter how long the video is.
And that struck me as hilarious. Like, they're storing video files. The uber giant hard thing to store and transmit. And a 5,000 character description, that's not even a single frame of the video.
Yeah.
Like, why would you put that cap on it? What, is there some abuse people could do if you gave them more? Like, what if somebody wanted just a full transcript in the show notes? You can't do it.
Not unless your video is like 5 minutes long.
Right. I mean, my transcript of that would not fit. That would not fit. Yeah, so even the subtitle files are bigger than that. Right? It's just so tiny. Why, YouTube? Why would you, like, oh, we don't want to fill up our hard drive space with those tiny blocks of text?
My only thought in defense of this policy is that maybe 5,000 is too small to fit any real code injection attack that you could do. So, like, you could imagine someone putting malicious code in the video description that when the page loads somehow gets executed by the browser or something.
People have done it within a tweet, so I can't imagine 5K characters. Man, yeah. I could do some friggin' damage in 5K characters of code. Man, that sounds like a fun challenge. That's too easy. That's way too easy. I would want to bring the cap down to like 1,000 characters. Feels like a more appropriate level of challenge. 5,000.
Well, maybe don't try, or they'll lower the limit again. It is pretty frustrating when I'm trying to paste in, like, these questions, and people think about their questions, and they, we don't always read the whole thing on the show itself, but we do always read the whole question like before the show starts. So it's kind of frustrating to be like, oh, there's something this person spent time on, and it's like asking this thing, and it provides context, and there's a link, or there's all these their own thoughts on there, and then like YouTube's like, nope, I don't think this is acceptable. I think you need to trim some of this down. Or, I don't know why you have so much to say about your video.
I don't know why you want to talk so much. I don't know why you're so eager to communicate with your viewers. What's wrong with you? Just post the video, let our ads roll, and get out of our way. Just fill us with content, you friggin' content mill.
We will decide what this video is about. I don't even know why you bother writing a description.
But you got a link to your own website? Get out of here with that. Nobody's leaving YouTube ever. They must stay and watch more ads.
I've had a subscription to YouTube Prime, or whatever it's called these days, for long enough that I don't even remember what YouTube ads are like, and I've heard that they just keep getting worse and worse.
Let's read a mailbag. Dear Diecast, any thoughts on this blog post laying out the case that Factorio is a good tool for testing potential coding talent? Keep them on the table, Will. Okay, full disclosure, this one came at literally the last minute, like as I came in here to do so I have not had time to read this post.
What? I just got done saying that we always read these things, Shamus. What are you trying to undermine me? On your own show? Oh, on your own show.
Right, so I have not read, I've read the Diecast, but I have not read the post in question. Just because it literally came in as the show was starting, and I liked the question. My gut reaction, anytime I hear a good tool for testing possible interview candidates, I immediately become very suspicious.
Why is that?
I have a dim view. I remember back in the 90s, it was like, oh, if they take you out to eat during an interview, don't cut your steak or don't salt it first, because that means you're impulsive and don't think through your decisions. You should taste it first. Or there were all these subtle social cues. And it was so outrageously obvious.
I've never had anyone take me out to lunch as part of an interview.
Right.
Except, I have one time, but like that never happens these days.
Right. Well, this was written in the run-up to the .com bubble. So there was a lot of, treat a potential candidate really well, because coders were just in very short supply. But there were all these things that you are and are not supposed to do, and kinds of questions, and they were all and then, as far as salting things, I mean, that could be cultural, that could be dietary, that could be a habit that you have.
Right.
Anybody that then this was something that, like, human resources people believed for a time. Like, you have witnessed how they eat, and so now you have some insight into how good they are at their job. And that bothered me, because it was basically, oh, here's one trick to help you do your job if you don't know how to do your job. Like, your job is to figure out if this person can write fucking code. Why are you watching them eat steak and trying to figure that out?
Right. The
best interview tool. And everybody's like, well, how about FizzBuzz? FizzBuzz, and it's like, yeah, but FizzBuzz is famous. Everybody's heard of it now. And a lot of the coding things are tricks. And I do not like quick trick questions. Like, how would you solve this? It's I forget, Microsoft had a one of, how do you figure out you've traversed an entire linked list if the elements in the list are a loop? And you're not allowed to, like, keep a variable to keep track of the first one where you start or something. Now figure out if you've gone through them all. And I'm like, well, okay, that's an interesting problem. That is definitely something I would sit down with a fellow programmer and we could talk about. But so little of coding is about coming up with brilliant tricks. Good coding, good coding is about being clear, having a picture of what you want to build before you start. Like, there are so many things that are important to maintainability. Communicating with other people, assuming this isn't, like, any code that you pay someone to make will need to be looked at by someone else. So you do not want somebody that is a master of obscure tricks and that writes spaghetti code. The thing I want to see more than anything out of a coder is a coder that can work with somebody else. Include, their future self even, that will leave documentation and will not create, inscrutable code to keep themselves employed because nobody else can work on it. And you can determine stuff like that by talking to them, by having them write just a regular example program. Like, do something simple. See what they do. See how they handle it. Have them modify some existing code. That's an even better test, since that's a test that reflects what the job is about. Very few jobs are, come in and write all new code for us. Most jobs are, here's an existing project. It's 20 years old. Come in and add something reasonable to it. So those are good interview tests. And here's one trick. Here's a question. Here's a super trick question you can get, people can give you in an interview. That all just sort of screams out to me that this company doesn't know how to appraise coding talent and doesn't know what it really takes for a bunch of people to collaborate on something fiendishly complex. Your goal should not be to hire the person that comes up with the most cleverest one-line solution to a fiendishly difficult problem. They are not going to write code that other people are going to have an easy time reading.
Right. Yeah, it is pretty discouraging to be going into a situation where you feel like you're being judged on factors that have no relevance to the job you're actually going to be doing.
Right?
But on the other hand, it's kind of discouraging for the people trying to hire people to have to rely on metrics that don't have anything to do either. So like it's in their best interest to try to find something that works as far as like, you know, how you can figure out if someone's any good or not.
Also, personality matters so much more than you think it does. Oh, it's a coder. They just sit in a box all day. And like, no, communication's important. People need to talk to coders. And if you've got one of those arrogant... In fact, a great coding test, have them answer a question on Stack Overflow. And if their answer is, this is a stupid question, do not hire them. Because we do not need more people like that at our company. Hey, can you add this feature to our software that many people want? Well, it's stupid. I shouldn't have to do that because it's stupid. Users are dumb. Why don't they use the shortcut key?
Yeah. The article, I've been kind of skimming it while I was pretending to pay attention to you. I mean, while I was paying attention to you, I've been kind of pretending to skim this thing. And they're basically saying that doing a multiplayer run of Factorio with someone is a really good way to get to know how good of a coder they're going to be, because it tests all kinds of things like how well you communicate, how well you debug things, what kind of view you have toward the future expansion of your factory when you're building things and just getting things running, and you know, stuff like that.
That I can agree with. I think that's a I think you could get that information faster by just having them, like I said, write some actual code, hand them your code base, and, you know, ask them to add a 10-minute feature and see what they come up with. But But
well, and in the conclusion, he says, like, this is totally impractical. You can't spend 20 hours doing a multiplayer playthrough interviewing a candidate. Like, that's just nuts. But there doesn't seem to be anything better around, so maybe this is a problem that we need to solve.
But if, you know, I was playing Factorio with other people for some unfathomable reason, like interacting with people, I can't imagine why, but if that hypothetically happened, and I found somebody that built a really beautiful base, and I was able to like, oh wow, look, I immediately see where the flow goes, I see where everything's produced, I see your goal, I'll bet I can look at this and see where you're going to build your rocket based on what you've built so far. And if I found out that person was a coder, yes, I would be very interested in them as a coder, because, you know, this is a very similar skill, and here's an expression of them using that particular kind of skill. But yeah, playing 20 hours of Factorio might not be as good as just, you know, other things you could do in an interview.
Yeah. A number of the companies that I've worked for that I've been really happy about have had interview coupled with testing, where they, you know, give you a test or, you know, like a take-home test or whatever, and then during the interview they'd be like, okay, so how did you know the answer to this question? Or like, you know, here's a very similar question. You got this question right on the test, so this should be easy for you. Just to, you know, make sure you didn't cheat or whatever. And it's really encouraging as a candidate to be like, oh, these guys really care about like people being competent, because I know if I'm going to work there that I'm not going to be working with a bunch of incompetent goofballs who just are really good at interviewing.
Right. Yeah. I mean, that's your job as the interviewer, is to weed out people that are really good at pretending to be competent, you know, really good at making impressive sounding resumes, but aren't actually talented, and weeding out assholes. I cannot stress this enough. The .com practice of just hiring the smartest possible, the highest IQ you could find, is terrible, because if you only hire for IQ and not for any other stuff, then you're going to wind up with, you know, statistically, 1 in 20 people is a rampaging, narcissistic, insufferable asshole. And you're going to wind up with some of those at your company. And it doesn't matter how smart that person is. They will use their intelligence to make everyone else miserable. That's a massive thing.
Right.
That's a massive liability.
And not only that, like, not only is 1 in 20, you know, going to be a torpedo to your company, but, like, all the people who aren't those guys, they probably already have jobs. So you're skimming from the pool of people who haven't been hired by anyone else.
Right. And they don't just, like, not do things well themselves. They drag everyone else down and fill the office with drama that you've got to deal with. Ugh. Filter out the assholes. I'd rather have a middling skill person that's easy to work with than the most brilliant programmer in the world who's a complete asshole. And incidentally, those two things aren't as opposed as people think. People think, oh, the better you get, the more of an asshole you are. And I've not found that. The most brilliant coders I personally know are actually both really nice people.
Yeah, it's true of engineers too, where you can have some very smart engineers, but they're not actually very good if they don't care about what anyone else wants. Because that's when it comes down to it, like, that's all that you need to do is do things that other people want. You're never hired just to do whatever you want.
Right. And, oh yeah, being a good engineer has built into it a requirement of humility. When you are in marketing, you need to stride in the room and your job is to convince everybody that your vision is the best way to go. This is the campaign we're going to use. This is going to do whatever it is that we do in marketing. You persuade people with your words. That's your job. So that's fine. Hire persuasive, forceful people. If you're an engineer, I don't want to fly in a plane designed by the person with the most forceful personality.
Right. Yeah. You have to really be in touch with what is actually real, not what do I want to convince everyone is real.
Right. If I ask him, hey, is this safe? Instead of saying yes or no, they will reply with, here are the checks I did.
How safe and under what conditions?
There's a Veritasium video where somebody goes, oh, you're the expert on this? And instead of saying yes, the person replied with, well, I've been doing it for 30 years. Like, you make up your own mind. Right. Is that an expert or not? I'm not going to claim to be an expert. I'm just going to state a factual truth. I've been doing this for 30 years. And I really like that. Right. Is this safe?
And maybe I'm not doing it well, but, like, here I am. That's all I can offer you.
You'll have to judge for yourself if you want to know. Am I an expert? I don't know. Judge the quality of the information I give you. And so, yeah, I incredibly value that from fellow engineers. And the huge alarm for me is anytime an engineer, like Linus Torvalds, is notorious about just being a forceful personality and makes me crazy. You know, it's sort of, you are obligated to be an asshole because we're all about truth. So we want blunt truth to the face all the time. And that's usually just an excuse used by people who don't want to filter their words and engage in diplomacy. And it's bad. It's not good for software. It's not good for any engineering. It is possible, if you have a forceful personality, to bully someone into agreeing with you when you are wrong. So don't do it, because then you will both be wrong.
Right. Well, and it's also possible to have a forceful personality, but not wield it against people and actually do the right thing. But, you know, you have to have it under control.
Right, you have to be aware of it. All right. Go ahead and take this next one.
Shamus and Friends. Why do games with character creators almost never line up Sideburns and Beards correctly? I have never met a person with a 2-inch gap between their sideburns and beard in real life, although I'll bet that they do exist. Gautsu, Chris. Thank you, Chris.
Is this a thing? I've never noticed.
I don't usually use the character creator to create characters with sideburns, so I guess I've never noticed either.
Yeah, I don't usually create bearded, even though in real life, if I could, I would be a big beardy man. I love having a beard, but I can only grow it on my chin. I can only grow, like, chin and mustache, thin mustache. It's actually very sad. If I could, I'd grow a great big beard, but when I create something in a character creator, I don't give myself beards. Once in a while, a mustache if I'm going for comedic. I don't know what it is. In real life, I don't think mustaches are that hilarious. But in a video game, in the context of a video game, I always find giving myself a mustache gives my character a vague comedic vibe that makes me happy.
Comedy gold.
Mustache.
Yeah, if I had to guess the reason why there are a lot of games with like sideburns and beards that don't line up correctly, I would guess that it's because sideburns are part of the hair, like the top of the head part, and then the beard is part of the bottom of the head, and then they just like animate them and align them and hook them all up to different bones, and at the end of the day they don't match up.
Designed by different people. He's totally drawing from totally different texture pools, so you can never get them to match.
Yeah. Well, and lots of games will let you color them differently. That's weird to me, because, like, that doesn't happen. Right. Where does that happen?
Right. Who has blonde sideburns and a black beard? What are you doing?
Yeah. And my mustache is slightly lighter than my beard, but, like, my beard and my hair are all the same color.
Have you ever grown a beard?
Oh yeah, I have one now. I don't grow a great beard. My wife kind of makes fun of me for it, but I persevere anyway. And it's not terrible.
I can't remember ever seeing a picture of you with a beard. You didn't have one. You were clean shaven when you visited me back in, what was it, 2015, 2016, something like that.
Yeah. I shaved it off. I think a week before. But anyway, yeah, I do have a beard now.
I envy your beard.
I can put a photo up. I'll send you a photo so you can have a photo of me. If that's something you want.
I'm just going to crop it so it's just your beard.
Okay.
And I'm going to put it in the locket
I'll send you a photo
that I carry
around.
Then. Just get it out and look at the beard every once in a while. Aww. I wish you
should put a picture up of your mustache too, just for comparison.
Oh, so we're now in a mustache measuring contest. Dear Diecast, I hope you're doing well. I've got 2 questions for Shamus. You used to play StarCraft and StarCraft II. Which race is your favorite and why? $5 says Terran, $5 says wrong. Also, do you still occasionally watch pro games? Take care and keep being awesome, Lino. Alright, if you're playing campaign, which everybody does like once, then Terran is always the most interesting because they have, like human characters you can relate to. Listening to like the Zerg gurgle at each other or the Protoss just like, emote Shakespeareanly at each other is not that fun. So campaign is Terran. But when I'm like versus the AI, which is most of the time, I was a Zerg player. I loved spreading creep. And do you still occasionally watch pro games? I get in fits. Every once in a while I'll get the bug will bite me and I'll just sit there and watch StarCraft for a week and then I'll forget about it for a couple years. The last time I was following was the year Scarlet won, what was it, like, I forget what all the acronyms are, it's like GSL or whatever. Scarlet is is a Zerg player like me, and she's just insane at sort of covering the map in creep. And it's magical because she moves so fast you can't see her doing it. You just, like, wait, the whole map is covered. She can see the whole map. When did that happen? And, so it's fun watching her matches just because she just does expand like a plague. And, so she was my favorite player to watch. She won a big tournament, and that's the last time I watched. And that was like 3 years ago, probably. So it's been a while. I'm due. I'm due for another bout of StarCraft fever. But yeah, I was a Zerg player. All right. We have officially done a show. Thanks to everybody who sent in questions. If you've got a question for the show, our email is diecast@shamusyoung.com. I'm probably sometime in the coming week going to be on the A Steve podcast with Chris. I'll have a link to it on the blog. I don't know. I need to hammer out the details of that, but you might get more than one podcast out of me this week. So watch out for that. Thanks for listening, everybody, and say goodbye, Paul.
Goodbye, Paul.